Friends, I'm going to ask you to take your seats. We're going to get started. Shh. John, before I invite you up to introduce our distinguished guest, I want to tell you a quick story. After the Ohio State National Championship, I went into my good friend's office. It's a bitter pill for a Michigan man. And I said, Elliot, maybe you take some comfort in knowing that Michigan beat Ohio State this year, right? So I went back in my office and I sat down and I started thinking about this, and I realized I have a daughter at the Kelly School in Indiana. And Indiana, in a sign that the apocalypse is upon us, beat Michigan this year. So by virtue of that, I believe Indiana is the national champion in football. All right? John, you bleed maize and blue. It's my pleasure to introduce you, ask you to come up and introduce our distinguished guest.
Thank you, Rabbi. For those of you who do not know me, my name's John Harrison. I'm a 1994 Michigan grad. Go Blue. I'm not going to read you Santa's biography, but I encourage all of you to read it when you get a chance. Instead, I want to just take a minute and focus on who Santa has been the last 2 years and all of the accomplishments that we have been thrilled to watch. Outside of a few small accomplishments, such as a natty for our football team, establishing the 2034 vision for the university, launching a $9 billion campaign, partnering with Los Alamos National Laboratory to develop an AI research center, among many other accomplishments. He has shown he is a true friend to the Jewish community and someone who does not tolerate hate towards any religious, ethnic, or other group. I am extremely proud to be part of a small group that Jeff Blau has assembled, which has worked closely with President Ono, combating anti-Semitism across the campus. As we are all aware, following October 7th, universities were faced with levels of anti-Semitism not seen publicly in decades. While the university started out with some missteps, which frustrated many in the community, today, under Santa's leadership, Michigan is viewed by many as a leader in the fight against anti-Semitism across all college campuses. Santa has made it clear that the rules regarding protests and anti-Semitism are clearly articulated, but also more importantly enforced. Santa has also personally been on the front lines in this battle. In November, when we asked Santa to attend the NOVA exhibit pop-up in Michigan, not only did he agree to attend, on his birthday nonetheless, but he arranged buses to bring over 100 students, faculties, deans, regents, the provost, the CFO, and others to join him at the exhibit alongside a young woman, Danny, who had survived that horrific day. We literally had to physically pull him out of the exhibit as he did not want to stop hearing from every single student and member of Michigan's community about what they thought and experienced. I can also tell you I've been on the phone with him at almost every hour of the day, starting as early as 5 a.m. and going as late as 1 a.m. addressing issues. He is a man with a strong moral compass and someone I considered the university to be extremely fortunate to be leading us, and thank him for being here today. President Ono.
John, thank you for those gracious words of introduction to President Ono. John, thank you to you, to Jeff Blau, to the entire committee who are really on the front lines fighting the good fight, expressing their love for the Jewish people, their love for University of Michigan. It really is a story of leadership, of stepping up to the moment, and I thank you and the entire team for all you do and setting an example of what it means to be the leaders and the best. So thank you. Santa, I graduate. Can I call you Santa or President Ono? Okay. very nervous. But this is, so I brought, you can choose which Michigan yarmulke you want to wear. There you go blue. And something just doesn't feel right. This is like a lifetime moment, like the White House, the Pope. This is above them all. So I'm just going to put on my Michigan alumni sweater.
Whoa.
This feels right. Welcome, President Ono.
Thank you, thank you.
We're so honored to have you. This is such a moment, and it's a moment that we celebrate your national leadership, your leadership on campus, but also just your Menschlichkeit, which is just being a good guy. It's like Rudyard Kipling talked about being able to walk with kings, but never losing the common touch. And I know because of our work together, because my daughter's at University of Michigan, you host the Hillel board, you go to the Hillel on campus. I think last night you hosted in your home the kids who were in Southfield when that home invasion happened, a very scary moment. So you open your home and you open your heart in small and large ways. And I only wish that my own congregants had Shabbat dinner as much as you do. So tell me, just to begin the conversation, on a personal dimension, where does this story fit into your own narrative of campus leadership, of inclusion, and the ideal of what a university should stand for?
Well, I just first want to thank you, Rabbi, for having me here. This is a synagogue that I haven't had a chance to listen to you by streaming video, and you often mention the University of Michigan, which makes me very, very happy, but also many, many insightful conversations that happen here. I know there have been conversations going on earlier today, and thank you for all coming here today. For having this conversation, and there'll be an opportunity for me to answer questions from you, and I'm here to learn from you and to be inspired by you. What a beautiful space. To answer your question about how does today, I guess, and sort of my effort to combat anti-Semitism, how does it fit into
your personal story
personally?
as well?
You know, I think when I traveled to Israel, I've been there a number of times, and I went to the Holocaust memorial site and saw, Raoul Wallenberg celebrated there as a person of great distinction. It was one of the most moving moments in my life. And, I think it was at that moment that I made a decision that there are people who have the fortune to be in situations and roles like yours, where you really are there to serve the congregation, the wider community. In my case, it's an honor and privilege to serve as president of the University of Michigan. And the reason why my visit to the memorial impacted me was that I think it underscored to me the importance of the responsibility for leaders like you and I to ensure that that sort of thing, the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, over millennia, we have a responsibility to do everything we can to make sure that that cannot happen. For me, what happened on campuses around the world, really, was horrifying. Because for me, what it indicated was that I was witnessing in front of my own eyes what had happened before the Holocaust in Europe. And, I think the phrase, if not me, who? If not now, when? That applies now for all of us. For me, after the invasion by Hamas, several months later, after tents appeared on the Diag and in Colombia and across the country, for me, what really was a pivotal moment was being visited at my house by a number of students from the University of Michigan, a group called FOG, Facts on the Ground. I was also visited by students from Hillel, and they told me what it felt like to be on a campus that was hostile to them. And for me, that was very moving. And it was sort of a call to me, and I think to every leader of any institution, whether you're a president or a dean, vice president of students, that the time is now, and it has to be us. We have to step in. We have to speak up everywhere and to say it's unacceptable. And so I don't know if that answers your question. What was happening on campuses was the furthest thing from inclusion.
Yeah, so let's get into that. What went wrong? And whether it's the University of Michigan or universities in general, but you've led multiple universities, and this promise of an inclusive place where ideas can be exchanged safely, and then to realize that we are part of a cultural moment, discourse that the Jewish community should find themselves post-October 7th at the brunt of it. So it was clearly a story that preceded October 7th, and October 7th brought some of the worst elements out. So just a little more on the diagnosis before we get to the prescriptive. What do you see happening amongst universities in your dialogues with university presidents, or just the arc of this story?
Well, it's a very complex question you've asked, but a very important one, because understanding the root causes of where we are is the only way we can actually address the current situation. And I should say that I've met with many other presidents in Washington, D.C., in different national organizations, and we've had these conversations about what can we do with our responsibility to serve and to really move back towards campuses where people can speak about what's on their mind, that won't be shouted down, where there is civil discourse and a mutual respect for people who are different. I'm sorry to say that I think that if you compare what we experienced, or I experienced when I was an undergraduate, the society has changed for the worse for a variety of reasons. Some of it is on the university, some of it is on all of us, some of it is on what's happening in the household, some of it's what's happening in K through 12. And if you think about some of those touch points, some of the developmental pathway to being a human being and citizen that can have civil discourse, where there can be truly an inclusive community, the fact that we de-emphasize understanding different cultures in K through 12, that we, fewer and fewer students are involved in debate, the fact that if you look at what's happened from when I graduated from University of Chicago in 1984 till now, there has been well-meaning, well-intentioned programs under the three letters DEI that I think in many cases have had a positive impact, and the motivations have been good ones. But ultimately, what I've found and others have found, and it's been written in many articles, is that it actually divides a diverse community of students, faculty, and staff, and we really need to take an honest, self-critical look at what's happening so that we can systematically address that which is a root cause of what we experience in the climate on campus. And so it's a pretty multifaceted, complex answer. It is not just on the universities, but the universities can play a pivotal role because we can address the microenvironment of the university campus, but since we educate teachers in K through 12, since we educate superintendents and principals, we have an opportunity like no other institution to have these conversations, to ask questions about what's gone wrong and how can we fix it. We have institutes for social research can actually get into real specific levers that are, I think, part of the malaise that we see, and we need to do that. It's our responsibility.
Right. So I'm going to come back to some of the whats, but I want to replay some of the October 7th and following from the who or the how. And I'm going to take some of our private dialogues publicly because we've also, and all of us, asked the question of the institutional structure of a university. There's the president of the university. At Michigan, there are the regents who are voted in. There are faculty members. There's administrators. There's DEI administrators, right? There are so many different pieces of this puzzle that seem totally dysfunctional. And I'm just wondering, as someone who's invested, after your distinguished career in research in university administration, and clearly not every university is the same, how the trustees work and faculty, but the ecosystem of a university, is it fundamentally flawed? I mean, how do you as president effectuate change with so many diverse constituencies?
I wouldn't say that the general organizational structure of colleges and universities is broken, because it's something that stems from the English and German and Italian universities. And so there are some shortcomings of it. There is a creation of silos, decentralization. You don't really benefit from the totality of what happens with the experts and students that are focused on and passionate about different disciplines. The power of a university comes from the intersection, the connections, the relationships, the conversations that occur in an interdisciplinary way. And so there are things that we are doing and other universities are doing to really tap into that opportunity, the intersections that are the most exciting places, the platforms for societal understanding. When you become too decentralized, focusing only on history or only on physics or only on biology, you need to have that kind of disciplinary strength. But in forming human beings and citizens of the future, there has to be some aspect of the education, a core curriculum that focuses on educating values and asking the questions about what it means to be, for example, a good human being and citizen. I think that if you look at curricula, even at my alma mater, that's been diluted. And I think that universities have to take another look. Not so much an organization. There are things you can do there that break down the silos and bring people together. Yes, and we're creating a new institute of civil discourse that will draw from all three campuses and all the schools so that we can model civil discourse, so we can, in a very supportive environment, make sure that conversations, very, very difficult conversations, can occur in a safe manner. But I think that we have to look at the curriculum, and we have to embrace our responsibility to educate people so when they go forth into society, whether they're teachers or lawyers, politicians, journalists, that there's some commonality, that there is a moral anchor. And I think that we have, as a world, lost that moral compass.
I'm going to drill down, and let me try to be more specific. What are your headwinds as a president of the university? Meaning, I sit across from you, and I say, this guy's got it going on, right? And I don't even have a kid who needs to get into Michigan anymore.
Yours graduate.
But well, one's still there. But you got faculty, and you got these regents, and not everyone agrees. And then you have student government. Like, what are your headwinds, Mr. President? If you want to do something, and they say it's otherwise, so how does the sausage get made?
So the first thing I'm going to say is that the fact that there are 8 regents with different views, and there's also me, that ultimately has to decide with their advice, is actually a good thing. I don't believe that an autocratic structure is conducive to thoughtful strategies and vision and leadership. And so I'm happy that there are 8 regents. I'm happy that they don't agree. It makes for interesting, long conversations, but ultimately it provides for me, just as is the case with my anti-Semitism task force, a diversity of views. Not all of you agree, but that really helps me think through from multiple dimensions what might be the best solution for the institution. I will answer, I think, what you're getting at, because you've mentioned the regents and the deans and the provost and the faculty and the graduate students. There's some students here that go to University of Michigan, and I know that I was with students yesterday night, and they said, we feel very safe. It's much better than it was after October 7th, and I'm very, very happy. They genuinely seem happy. But they did say to me, honestly, sometimes it's a faculty member, or sometimes it's a graduate student instructor that we have the most issue with. And it's challenging because all educational institutions, a cornerstone is freedom of expression, which we not only believe at our core is important to what a university ought to be, with limits, which we can discuss. But it's also something that has to be managed. And you're right, a university the size of University of Michigan with 3 campuses and 19 colleges in Ann Arbor alone, I cannot physically monitor what's happening in all 1,000 classes on a given day. There are graduate student instructors that I know of that are no longer there, who have said or behaved or taught in an inappropriate way. And so it is a very challenging issue. Faculty members have tenure for a good reason, to preserve that academic freedom. But sometimes it's a shield, it's a veil that permits behavior that is not in the best interests of the students or the institution as a whole. And so, to answer your question, all these headwinds, I actually like challenges. And what you have to do is systematically have the conversations in concentric circles, so you actually shine a light on what's wrong, and then try to develop a strategy to address each of those. So part of that has to do with making it clear that we have boundaries, we have rules, we have policies. There are criminal laws in the various jurisdictions. And for the longest time, I would say universities have been too lax. And that's part of the problem. And what's happened at many institutions is there is a feeling almost verging on anarchy in some situations, where people think they can do anything and get away with anything. And that simply is not acceptable. Yeah. And so one of the things that I have said in multiple locations, and there are people who are not happy with me, is that we have rules. We cannot have a toxic environment. We have to hold people accountable, and we have. Many schools have let off people, they've arrested them and let off people. But I've been very clear. If you, whether you're a faculty member, staff member, or student, do something which is racist, discriminatory, anti-Semitic, it's not acceptable. And that's important. So.
Thank you. I remember that. I remember, we can clap. Last spring, I was at my older daughter's graduation, and not only was there the encampment, but there was also a disruption during the graduation proceedings, and there was this balancing act between not wanting to escalate, certainly not wanting to devolve into violence, be it on the diag or at graduation, but then on the other hand, you say, well, rules that cease to be enforced cease to be rules. And so where are we on the accountability question right now?
Well, so one of your earlier questions is, why did this happen? And part of my answer was sort of a loss of a moral compass, and that we have to address that systematically. We have to teach, once again, civil discourse and respect. And we have to clearly articulate policies and hold people accountable for it. Where are we? We are, I think, pretty clear. Things have been very, very quiet, and from my conversations with students, much safer than they were. It takes a lot of effort and organization in a place with 3,600 acres to accomplish that, but it's one of our responsibilities. And we will commit to it. The second part of how did this happen is I alluded to the fact that at many institutions there's been a slippage, that people have looked the other way. And so the sense was that anything is acceptable, and it took time to address that. In terms of the encampment, I would say one of the most dangerous situations occurred not too far from here at Columbia. Same thing happened at UCLA. It's a miracle that nobody got killed at UCLA, because for 3 hours people were hitting each other with 2x4s with not sufficient security. You need to have sufficient security. And we've gotten there thanks to the Anti-Semitism Task Force. We've actually taken each of these issues systematically, almost like a spreadsheet, and said, what are we doing, what are we doing, what are we doing? And that's, if I have been successful in any way, it's because of you, because of the task force. And I would say that that's one of the reasons why we are here in this current situation, because the failure in articulation of the policies and the rules, and the failure to hold people accountable. The other thing is that there are no playbooks. So I've had the honor and privilege of being a president during Black Lives Matter, during COVID, and now this. and so I thought, I'd be pretty experienced, and I thought it was pretty scary to run a university during COVID when we didn't have vaccines and people were afraid they were going to die, and they had to take tests with students not that far away, with spacing, If you think about what happened at Columbia and what happened at UCLA, and to a lesser extent in Michigan, the truth of the matter is that many administrators didn't know what to do. They didn't have a playbook. There were quite a few riots during the Vietnam War, as you know, and they were quite significant in Michigan, I'm told, by people who were there. Maybe some of you were there. The level of chaos, of pushback, of organization of bad actors from different countries, they had a playbook. This had been building for some time. We now know that. University administrators were flat-footed. People were trying to figure out, what are we going to do, And you saw that here at Columbia. There were multiple attempts to remove the encampment that failed. You saw it at the University of Chicago, very, very crowded, all kinds of bad actors coming in. It was not easy, and It's not easy to manage those kinds of situations. So I think, part of the fact that things are in better control are that university presidents are getting together, administrators are getting together, and we're beginning to develop a playbook that addresses things like insufficient articulation of policies, insufficient accountability, but exactly what do you do to ensure that an encampment doesn't go up? What do you do to quickly take it down? And how do you manage these situations? And it has not been easy to be a president or a dean or a regent. As you probably know, our regents have been subject to vandalism.
Yeah.
And their security, and this is true at Columbia as well. And so this is a battle not only with what's happening within the institution, but to be very frank, bad actors from the outside that are trying to destabilize our nation on our college campuses.
Right. So let's talk about, well, not all universities are the same. You're the president of a public university. And to this question of freedom of expression with guardrails, right? And we had David Shizer earlier this morning. He was talking about time, place, and manner. So I'm wondering, what is prescriptively are you feeling, or what's the state of the conversation as how to maintain the university commitment, the First Amendment commitment to freedom of discourse, but not have the hostility, the marginalization of Jewish voices, all of the underbelly of when that commitment goes awry? So
Columbia and Michigan are very different. Beyond, we have a much better football team. But part of it has to do with the requirements for compliance with respect to freedom of speech. It's absolute for a public university. Private universities have more latitude. I would say, can you remind me of the second part of the question? That's the
just how to balance these two, and
the landscape has also changed within the past about 8 to 12 months because many universities, scores of universities, have been investigated by the Office of Civil Rights. And we were one of the first two to settle because we looked at the situation and realized that we could do better. Some universities have still not settled. They've taken kind of a defensive posture, and our approach at Michigan is to learn from what we can do better and then to get to the work of doing better. And so what all these scores of universities were found not addressing appropriately was the hostile environment. So in the case of Michigan, we had scores of complaints come to the office that handles it. It was not appropriately staffed with a coordinator and an expert on Title VI, which is where this resides within the law. And so we've developed that. We've decided to fix that. We're one of the first institutions to create a Title VI office. And now we very rapidly assess whether something has crossed the line from free speech to creating a hostile environment. And we almost immediately provide supports for the students. And that's part of the responsibility of the university. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Just a granular thing, but a hot button question. Masking. The idea that masking is a form of intimidation unto itself. Are we able to take steps to stop that?
We have such a policy, an anti-masking policy, but when you have 53,000 students, having a policy and enforcing it are two different things. But we are going to be focused on enforcing it because it's not just intimidation, it's a real problem. If my house has been vandalized, both the official house and our own private house, and most people have cameras at their house, the Ring bell, and we look at the videos. We can't figure out who it is because they're masked, and so it's intentional. And so, the problem is that in the private neighborhood, you can't say you can't wear a mask. They can say it's a medical mask, I don't want to get COVID. But in a university, we have that policy. And then, obviously people will try to resist that, but this is another example. Have a policy, work to hold people accountable.
Let's talk about an easy question, the line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So this is hotly debated not just by the university community, but by the Jewish community itself.
Sure.
At what point does criticism of Israel and criticism of the Israeli government devolve into base hatreds against the Jewish people? So how is this discussed in the university? How can we make progress?
I mean, we're discussing it right now, and we've discussed it in the Anti-Semitism Task Force, and I'm discussing it with the regents right now. As you know, Harvard University, under tremendous spotlight, adopted the IHRA definition. You know, that's relatively rare. And the reason why it's rare, you know, I've been in this business long enough that I remember when the IHRA definition in McGill was being developed, and I think it's a fine definition. The controversy within the Jewish community, as well as in higher education or society in general, has to do with the concern that it will dampen freedom of expression, and you know, arguably in some cases, criticism of Israel like there would be any criticism of any government, right? That's the thing. For me, the complicating factor is that far too often in my experience, criticism of Israel is right next to anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews. And so, you know, there is another definition, the JDA, that some of you are familiar with, that I think parses it a little bit more carefully. I think that what institutions have to develop, and I haven't discussed this with the Anti-Semitism Task Force, but what my personal opinion is, and I want to recommend it to the regents, is to create the capacity and expertise when you have a complaint to determine whether it is simply a criticism of Israel, which might be appropriate depending upon what you think, and when it has crossed the line to be actually anti-Semitism. There is a way to do it. Most universities don't have the resources to look at each case by case, but that could happen. I would love to see more universities and the University of Michigan look at the JDA definition, because that kind of...
Can you just help me, because I'm not familiar with parsing it? Yeah. So why does that help the conversation, the JDA?
Because it gets into a little more granularity, what would constitute criticism of Israel or criticism of Israel that is anti-Semitic. And it's a whole field. We launched an institute, as you know, the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, and I'm very proud of it. Raoul Wallenberg, for those of you who don't know, is a Michigan graduate who saved thousands of lives and should be an inspiration to people around the world. And we've created an institute. We have a great new director, Jeffrey Weidlinger, and we're having these kinds of conversations. How can we be a university that sets the stage to assess these kinds of cases, in addition to many other things that they're doing? We want to be a place that not only is at the cutting edge of implementing strategies to combat anti-Semitism, but to address these kinds of complicated issues about which definition is appropriate. How can we educate society to understand what's the difference between criticism, anti-Zionism, criticism of Israel, and anti-Semitism? And so universities ought to be the places that really discuss this and share it with the wider society.
Thank you. Let's pivot to Israeli institutions. The University of Michigan has active academic institutional relationships with Israeli research centers. What's the state of play on this? Are these growing? Are you getting pressure to roll them down? Where does the university system stand vis-a-vis Israel?
Well, very similar to our position on divestment. You know, the University of Michigan has very rich relationships with Technion, Hebrew Union University. and many other research institutes as well. And they're very robust. And if I've been able to actually listen to the progress reports of collaborations between Michigan scientists and researchers and students and those in Israel, and I'm not exaggerating, they have permitted much of what society enjoys in terms of new therapeutics, new approaches to treating incurable diseases, new technologies that we take for granted. So we are growing those relationships. We will not back down. It's an incredible partnership. We're proud of it. I have invested from my office in growing it, and I don't know if Tom Baird is here, but we're trying to increase the endowment even more so that we can have much more activity. It's an incredible. We have annual meetings. We have a scientific advisory board between Israel and Michigan. And when you talk to the scientists, to the students, to the trainees from both Israel and Michigan, they say to me, we couldn't have gotten this grant. We wouldn't have made this discovery without that kind of partnership. We have to grow these bridges because the world loses when we look inside and become insular. And as long as I'm president of the University of Michigan, we will never back down on our commitments to Israel.
All right, you might need a sip of water before this one, or whiskey. DEI. So Michigan has been in the paper lately.
A little bit.
A little bit. A little bit.
In a little New York paper.
Yeah. So
there must be a New York Times person around here.
So successes and the importance of DEI, I hope, are self-evident to all, to redress some historically marginalized communities, to make sure that underrepresented groups are represented. And the excesses, prioritizing one identity over another, sowing division or subdividing people to groups, a loss of meritocracy, and here in this sanctuary, a feeling amongst Jews that everyone should be included except for Jews. And on the one hand, Michigan has been a leader in this field, some $250 million based on the article, spent 163 DEI professionals. On the other hand, I read that last month, Michigan's no longer requiring DEI statements in their faculty hires. So what's going on?
All right, so you all read this very long article in the New York Times, and you summarized the points, the size of the program, the number of individuals involved. And you're absolutely right. If you look at the history of the United States or any country, there have been moments where, for example, African Americans, Asians, Jews have been excluded from schools, from neighborhoods. And like I said, all of us agree that the intentions for the DEI programs are the right ones. You cannot have discrimination in society or in schools. And the partnership that we have with Israel, with Jewish communities around this country and around the world, a lot of it stems from the fact that Michigan was a place where Jewish students could study when they couldn't get into an Ivy League school. And so the concept of breaking down barriers or access is totally appropriate and defensible. In my view, and this is my own personal view, what has happened is that the implementation of DEI programs at most institutions have varied and lost their focus. And we have a responsibility, all of us in higher education, to address that slippage. And so for me, and I've thought about this a lot, I think the most troubling thing idea or ideology that has come, unfortunately, out of these efforts has been a simple either-or bimodal simplification of society, which is problematic. And that is that there are those who are privileged, those who are not, there are those who are the oppressors, those who are oppressed. And that divides people. And it's simply not true. No matter what ethnic group you're looking at, you have Asians who are privileged, you have Asians who are immigrants who are poor, and defining and creating rules by ethnicity alone oversimplifies the very complicated situation that truly has to be addressed. And segregating groups, you can, obviously creating diversity and representation is good, but what we've found at many institutions is that there is a focus on a smaller subset of the diverse group of students that actually are on campus. And you probably read in the New York Times that a member of our DEI team was heard by two professors from another institution saying they didn't have to care about Jewish students because they're privileged, and we focus on other students. Now that's an oversimplification. And I even had somebody come to me and say, and that's anti-Semitism. When you characterize an entire group of Jewish people by one caricature, that's part of the definition of anti-Semitism, and it's inappropriate. So getting back to what should we do, the Regents and I are really taking a look at our program. There are things we're very proud of that were accomplished by the DEI program. The University of Michigan in many ways was the birthplace of affirmative action through the SCOTUS decisions with Lee Bollinger, who became the president of Columbia University. And for the longest time, that was a vehicle to open the doors and to break down some of the discrimination that was real, right? So that's okay. But things change in time, and you have to reassess whether something is appropriate. And I think the real problematic part of DEI programs, including the one at Michigan, has been this oversimplification and polarization of people into different groups. That's not helpful. It's not inclusive. It is certainly inappropriate for someone in a DEI program to say, I don't care about this whole group of students, whether they're Jewish students or Asian students, because they're privileged. And I read in the paper, I think the New York Times the other day, they said, well, it's defensible because if you have a garden and there's some plants that need water and the other ones don't need water, you put water on the plants that are withering. Well, then what happens if you do that is the other ones are neglected and then they wither. And so I think that argument doesn't hold at all. And for me personally, and I think the Regents agree, that that's part of the problem. And we will not accept that. Any diversity and inclusion program at the University of Michigan, while I'm president, has to honestly support all students. And don't make a caricature of what they are, because that minimizes the actual experience, historical and in that person's life, of what they've actually. Do not assume privilege, because there are many things that have impacted and harmed many ethnic groups. And in my humble opinion, that's a problem with how we approach DEI today.
Thank you. So I'm going to open it up and get one or two questions. I have about 8,000 more. But I'm going to ask you this while everyone's thinking about what their question is. Not a political question, but I am aware that there's been a transition from one administration to the other. I don't know, you heard? Yeah, okay. So I'm just wondering if you had obviously with Title VI, with questions of funding and otherwise, in certainly public universities, this is a major element of how the U.S. government does or doesn't relate and what's demanded and what's incentivized. So if you had a magic wand and you're thinking about the most productive, constructive direction that the government should be playing in the legislation, enforcement, and otherwise of the whether it's DEI, whether it's admissions, meritocracy, or what role do you see that you'd like the U.S. government to be playing?
Well, in a very short period of time, there have been a flurry of executive orders.
I've heard.
And we are analyzing them just like you are, real time. Several of them have direct relevance to what happens at universities. One of them, the mics are coming out to you for your questions. One of them has to do with DEI and I mean, there's a lot going on right now. The NIH is kind of, communications are frozen, review of grants are frozen, and I think the new administration in Trump 2.0 is a totally different situation than 1.0 for a variety of reasons. They've really thought through what they want to accomplish. And depending upon who you are, you can be supportive or not of many of the priorities. You know, I do believe personally, if you listen to Rubio today, that he intends to combat anti-Semitism on campuses. He intends to be a staunch supporter of Israel. It's clear. You know, when it comes to DEI programs, it's really clear, and it was messaged very clearly even during the campaign, that the new administration saw some of the concerns and flaws that we've discussed, and will hold universities accountable in addressing that, in addressing hostile environments, in making sure that universities are safe for all students. And I think that's actually good. The problem is that the penalty for lack of compliance, and this is something that every university administrator is thinking about, is scary. You know, it has to do with access to federal funds, whether it's financial aid or research grants from the NIH or NSF. And so every institution that I'm aware of has a transition team that's, as the executive orders come out, are studying them and thinking about what do we do. And that's exactly where we are today. I spent a lot of time, some of my team is here, I know where Richie Hunter is, we did it today. And so that's the reality, and it happens with every change in administration. To answer your question, there are things that I think that Trump is doing that I think will be very good for society and for education. And we have to, as an institution within society, when we don't agree or want to articulate a different view, it's on us to communicate that to government. And so, like any transition, that's what's happening right now. I do think there's some good things that will happen, to be frank. I think that the slippage in accountability for people that create hostile environments, who disrupt the core mission of a university in teaching and research and healthcare, that has no place in universities. And I think that Trump will have zero tolerance for that. And I said the same thing about 8 months ago. We have to have zero tolerance for that. So I think in that extent, right, it'll be positive.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question? All right, well, this is almost unfair. All right, well, we'll go with, he didn't go to Michigan, but he is a professor. Is that David? So David, a brief statement with a question mark at the end of it.
Right, thank you.
Please stand up, David.
Stand up.
Hi, David.
So Michigan is a public university, and as a public university, it is obliged to follow the First Amendment.
That's right.
And the First Amendment permits racist speech. At the same time, Michigan is obliged under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to prevent racially harassing speech. These appear to be contradictory, so how do you reconcile them?
Well, you've summarized it completely. And so what we do is that in those instances where it's not hate speech, which is a rare situation, then it moves into the Title VI office, and we provide supports for students that might be experiencing a hostile environment. We also work with those who are responsible for creating the hostile environment. So that's how we deal with it.
Okay. Who do we have? Is there a graduate of the University of Michigan I can call on, or a present student?
There are none here.
Okay, no. Oh, okay, you, because of the sweater you're wearing. All right.
I have one of those.
And please say your name and briefly state your question.
Beth Balsam, proud mom of a recent grad and a sorority sister of your daughter. and proud aunt of 5 IDF combat soldiers. So it's been a really tough year and a half, and I want to thank you. I know you personally paid the price for standing with the Jewish community, so thank you. My assessment when I look at it is there's an element of hate, right? There's people who glommed on this opportunity to attack Israel and attack Jews, but then there's a whole group of followers who get their news from social media and are just filled with ignorance. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, is there a different prescriptive to attacking the hate versus the mass ignorance that stems from getting news on social media?
I think you're 100% on the mark. That's exactly what I see. You'll see it on TikTok, whether it's allowed or not, or on Instagram. You'll see it. You'll see kids that are protesting in a neighboring university, and they ask, "Why are you here?" We don't know. We're just here because it's cool. You know, the fact of the matter is, it's not cool, and there has to be a communication strategy, not only institutionally but nationally, and I want to be part of that. That points out that it is not cool to be anti-Semitic. It is not cool to discriminate against any group. You know, the owner of the New England Patriots wanted to start with a campaign. I wanted to do it with the Big Ten. You know, a lot of people watch football games. More people watch Michigan football games than Ohio State games. 25 million versus 23. But the point is, I'm sorry, I can't resist those jabs at the school down south. But the point is that the only way to combat misinformation is to communicate with youth with the channels that they actually are paying attention to. It's like trying to email students at the University of Michigan when they don't read your email. You know, you gotta have a social media presence. And so that's where I think we're a little bit behind. Remarkably, there's pushback when you try to mount those kinds of campaigns across conferences or the NFL. And they say, oh, you can't just call out anti-Semitism, you have to call out all discrimination. And I say, excuse me, do you know what's been happening for the past 18 months? We need to focus on anti-Semitism, you know? And so we do need to have that kind of strategy. And that's why, you know, some of you may know, it hasn't been announced yet, but I'm going to be at the Anti-Defamation League annual meeting at the Javits Center, because the community, the society needs to see people like me saying this is not right. And
okay, we are running out of time, so I'm going to ask you 2 quick questions, one controversial and one hopefully inspirational. So quick 2 questions. Number 1, I got to do this. The future of athletics. NIL, collectives, how it's going to impact college sports and athletics broadly. Nothing to do with anti-Semitism. What's the future of college sports?
You might have heard that Harvard University is breaking away from the NCAA because they don't want to make the payments.
Wow, no, I didn't hear that. Okay.
You've seen that, right? Look, it's a crazy time. It was the wild, wild west about a year ago. And those of you who have worked with me on Wolverine athletics know that's still not fixed. There's little federal regulation. There have been fits and starts about some federal regulation. I mean, it's not a secret that we paid $10 to $12 million for one player. We have the #1 ranked recruit quarterback, the #1 ranked running back. You applaud, but it's a lot of money. And the thing is, I don't get to raise it. Until recently, I wasn't able to talk about it, right? I wasn't personally allowed to contribute. And so there's so much mystery, so much confusion that we got to sort it out. You know, we need to have the conversations in the right places. Look, I'm all for, as Jim Harbaugh was, for athletes getting some of what they've earned. They study, they put their lives in harm's way to compete for the school. And for the longest time, their jerseys were sold at MDen, no longer MDen. And all this television money was coming in. It was going to the NCAA, to the conference commissioners, and the schools, and the coaches. It's about time some of it went to the players. I believe that. But the combination of NIL, name, image, and likeness, if you're not following sports, I can explain it later. It's a long conversation. It has some court decisions behind it. So the reason why there's a lot of money involved and the impact on the university is, one, the decisions are to retroactively pay former athletes and current athletes. That's part of it. But also making sure that current players get some, part of what they earn from their name, image, and likeness. That's what NIL is. And so there's also the problem, we could go on for 2 hours.
No way.
There's also the problem
I know you have a flight back.
of the portals and all kinds of rules with the NCAA that are really very convoluted. And so it's high time at the appropriate time. It's not the top priority, but we need to sort this out because we are creating another professional league. And there are real questions about the student experience. So a student may want to actually enter the portal after a year and say, I'm not going to play for Ohio State, I'm going to Michigan. I say, you're smart. But it's not good for their student experience, right? You want the student to stay at a school and benefit and make friends and all that kind of stuff. So there's more than money here. There's what's in the best interest of the scholar athlete. So we got to figure this out. And so, I think for the longest time, conference commissioners and presidents of universities who are on the boards of these conferences have been asleep at the wheel, seduced by, can you make more money from a certain television contract, than asking the question, what's in the best interest of the sport? What's in the best interest of the student? And we got to get there. And that's one thing government can do. Government can, as you've seen over the past several days, there can be legislation or executive orders that can come into play. Probably not in this case, but there are things that the Senate and House can do in cooperation with people like me and conference commissioners to make this a little bit more sane, and it's much needed.
And just because there's murkiness and because this is a public event, I just want to clarify that it was not me who fronted the $10 million for the quarterback at University of Michigan. We have high school students here. We have Jewish high school students here. We have parents of those who are sending their kids to college. Do you have, just to close, Mr. President, a message that you'd like to direct to young people as they think through their journeys into the University, Michigan, or otherwise?
I just will say exactly what I said to about 25 Jewish students currently at the University of Michigan, and that is that I, as the president of the University of Michigan, but the vast majority of University of Michigan, is proud of our history with Jewish students. I said that we are the university we are because of Jewish students who have preceded you. It's just an incredible history of people who have contributed to every field of academic endeavor. And so my message for you, if you're a current student, I hope you've noticed that we have made it a priority to make the campus safe, a place that you can be proud of, and we will continue to do that for eternity. For students who are thinking about applying to the University of Michigan, first thing I got to say is it's kind of hard to get in these days. Over the past 2 years, probably because of the national championship, the early action pool went from 48,000 to 71,000. Crazy. We have about 8,000 in a class, about 4,000 from out of state. You have that many seats in the entering class at University of Pennsylvania, for example. They get about 50,000 applications. We have 71,000 applications for the same number of seats. And so, study hard if you're a high school student. It is competitive, but if there's anything we can do or I can do to give you some counsel about the best way to prepare and to respond in your application, we want you to come. We want you to seriously think about coming to University of Michigan as a student. It is an amazing university. It is a cult, but it is a place. It is a place, if you think about it, about 110 of our programs are in the top 10, I'm going to boast a little bit, top 10 in the country. Many of them in the top 10 in the world. Some of them number 1, top 5 in the country. I mean, just think about it. And then on top of that, we had twice as many Big Ten championships over the past few years than Ohio State. And it is a vibrant Jewish community. It's a large Jewish community. And I got to tell you, in spending time with the Hillel and Jewish Resource Center students recently, they're really enjoying it. So come join us, and I hope to welcome you to the University of Michigan.
Thank you, President Ono. Hail to the victors. Thank you.
I'm going to take you out that way. I'm going to take you out the back way.
You are a man.
Is that okay? Thank you. Yeah.
Before people